Anytime we watch pornography, masturbate, and get sexual stimulation, our negative emotions like fear and anxiety, that part of your brain just gets suppressed. And this is where people get into a lot of trouble because suppressed emotions just grow over time. So the more guilty I become, the more of a loser I become. The harder it is to date, the worse I feel about myself, the more I fall into pornography. So this becomes a neurological cycle. But here's the real problem. All addictions are on the rise. And this is why.
Dr. K is back, and the Harvard-trained psychiatrist is breaking down modern mental health, addiction,
and the non-traditional ways to break away from their cycles.
There's lots of stuff happening around us that affects our lives that we have no control over. For example, because of the dating and mating crisis, we no longer have sexual connections, emotional connections, and there's a part of the brain that is getting starved because sex is so important. So there's something missing in our lives, and that's what is necessary for addiction to grow. And this is creating huge problems because it's sort of like if I fill up your stomach with unhealthy food, you don't have any micronutrients, but you're not gonna crave broccoli. So that's what's happening in our society. We're using porn as a substitute for relationships. And that's creating these really strong societal pressures, including a mass extinction event. Because we've got 32-year-olds who do not know how they're gonna ever have children. Men are getting really, really angry. There's like this incel movement, like women feel safer with a wild bear than they do with a man.
I mean, there's a lot that I'm thinking about, like what do you do about this?
The whole reason we get trapped in a cycle of addiction is because we have one solution to one problem. The moment that we create a second solution, a lot of things change, and we'll get to that.
What about psychedelics?
So here's the real problem with psychedelics.
Listen, to my regular listeners, I know you don't like it when I ask you to subscribe at the start of these conversations. I don't like saying it, I don't like it being in there, none of us like it. It's frustrating. Do you know what's also frustrating? It's also frustrating when I go into the back end of the YouTube channel and I see that 56% of you that listen frequently to this podcast haven't yet subscribed. And so many of you don't even know that you haven't subscribed because I see in the comment section, you say to me, you go, I didn't even realize I didn't subscribe. And that actually fuels the show. It's basically like you're making a donation to the show. So that's why I ask all the time, because it enables us to build and build and build and build. And we're going for the long term here. So all I'd ask you is if you've seen this show before and you like it, help me, help my team here, hit the subscribe button, and we'll continue to build this show for you. That's my promise. Thank you to all of you guys that do subscribe, it means the world to me. Let's get on with the show. Dr. K.
Steven, what's up, dude?
We've obviously met several times before, but for those of you that might not be familiar, who are you and what do you do?
I'm a psychiatrist, and what I try to do is help people understand themselves. Because one of the harsh lessons of the world that we live in today is there's lots of stuff happening around us that affects our lives that we have no control over. So if you look at fundamentally, you know, there's like war, there's inflation, there's like a dating and mating crisis, like whatever. There's AI, there are all these like existential threats, but like you as a human can do nothing about any of that. All you can really control is like the bounds of what's in here, right? That's like literally the only thing that you have control over. And so one of the lessons I learned very early on, I spent years studying to become a monk, was that if I can learn how to master this, then the rest of the world becomes way more manageable at a minimum and hopefully incredibly easy.
Is there a step one in understanding that this is all we can control and taking control of just this? Is there a first step that you went through?
Absolutely, yeah. The first step is trying to control things outside of me and failing miserably time after time after time.
Check.
Because I think it's wild, right? So I think it's like most people will try to get their boss to do something, try to get their boyfriend to do something, try to get their girlfriend. And forget about boyfriend, girlfriend. This person that I am texting, right? Try to get them to respond. And we spend so much of our energy trying to shape the world to fit us. And this has also been the direction of like technology too, where we don't want to change anymore. We want the things around us to adapt to our environments, like air conditioning. I don't want to change my tolerance to heat. I want to change the entire space that I live in to be more comfortable for me. And this is creating huge problems because I want to change the environment to suit my preferences. You want to change the environment to suit your preferences, and then we have to be in the same room. So this is why we fight over where the climate control is.
And what's the risk there then of us having this focus on changing our external environment? Obviously, we're going to fight, but is there any other risk in that? Is it just going to be that me and you, our relationship's going to fray when you want a certain temperature and I want a different temperature?
That's a huge problem, right? So I think if we look at like conflict in the world, it is two groups of people wanting the world to be different. So I want the boundaries of my country to be here. You want the boundaries of, you want to move that line somewhere else. And this is literally why wars start. So I think that what we spend a lot of time and energy in is trying to shape the world towards us, but that is not fundamentally possible. And so instead, like we could be investing that energy into ourselves, learn how to craft myself into, let's say, perfection, loaded word, which carries a lot of stuff. But the moment that you do that, things become really, really easy.
Things become really easy.
Yeah. So I think if you look at like, there's a ton of research that shows that, happiness, productivity, success, all of these three things like come together. So one of the biggest mistakes I think people make in society is like, they talk about work-life balance, like that's wrong. Work-life balance implies that you have to make a sacrifice for the other thing, right? That these two, I don't think that that's actually technically true. If you look at the way that society really, the way that a human being really works, people who are happy with their work will feel happy and they will work the best, right? The outcomes from their productivity will be higher. This is not a trade-off that we need to make. The biggest problem is that most people are forced to make trade-offs, and then what they try to do is they try to find the perfect job. And this is what's so silly, right? People will say, do what you love for work and you'll never work a day in your life, right? Like people will say like, if your passion becomes your job, like you'll never work a day in your life. And then there are other people who also say, keep your passion as your passion because the moment it becomes your job, you'll start to hate it. Mm-hmm. And that's like, how can both of these things be true? And it kind of is like, there's no way to win. So I think that's where like winning happens internally. And once you start doing that, and there's tons of research about flow state and things like that, that once you become happy internally, even in terms of relationship success, if you carry a lot of unhappiness with you in a relationship, it won't work well. So internal work like will manifest outward. And I don't mean that in a spiritual sense. I mean that like that is true, but in like a very concrete sense, right? If you show up at work and you feel happy, like people will like you more. You'll be more productive.
And is there a second step? So I understand I tried to control the world, I wasn't successful. Step 2 is to focus that energy inwards and take control of my internal state, which is difficult because it feels to us like we're very much being dragged often by our temptations, the dopamine receptors in our brain or something.
Yeah.
And we have a bad night's sleep, we wake up in a bad mood, and then we have a bad day. That's how it feels.
So, and I think if we sort of think about it, right? So it's like, I started my car this morning. I looked at the gas tank. There was only a little bit of gas left. And then I ended up on the highway without any gas. I ran out of gas, right? That's one follows the other. Like that's how it feels, right? Like I left and I'm like, oh no, I'm running low on gas. And then I run out of gas. That's what happens logically, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you fix that problem?
Go to the gas station.
Absolutely. The whole problem is, if I ask you, what is go to the gas, what's the equivalent in that analogy for a human being? No one knows. You're like, right? So if I were to ask you, okay, you wake up, you slept poorly, you wake up. Now you're in a bad mood. Therefore, you have a bad day. You're assuming that those two things are connected. Those two things, are connected, but only if you don't know how to go to the gas station. So they're literally everything from like practices to things you can eat to all kinds of things to alter that chain of causality. So I think the second step is, first of all, understanding what is going on inside you. How can you move the levers? What is the internal chain of causality? And once you understand that, then you can start to implement change. And that's when it becomes easy. So if you sort of think about it, like, I know it sounds weird because it sounds really hard, but literally, the difference between something hard and something easy is whether you know how to do it. Right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, like the Rubik's Cube is hard. Like a Rubik's Cube is hard, but if you know how to do it, it becomes easy. So it's about really understanding, where do my desires come from? Where do my temptations come from? And here you are trying to control them. Forget about controlling them. Like, I don't like controlling my desires. I hate it. it's hard. It requires a lot of discipline. It requires a lot of willpower. What works way better is sublimating them,
What does that mean?
getting rid of them.
How would you put it in the context of pornography in terms of controlling that desire and being productive and not letting it consume you?
Let's start with first principle. Good diagnosis precedes good treatment, right? So in medicine, the quality, this is what a lot of people think. Doctors are about treating people, right? Medicine is about treating things, but actually 50% or more of our training is in diagnosis. So you have to understand the problem. And this is not just true of doctors. This is like, if I have a plumber who's coming to my house, whether they can fix what the problem is depends on whether they can find the problem, right? What's actually causing the leak, then you replace that. So that's true of life in general. So if you have a problem like pornography, the first thing that you have to do is understand why you are addicted to it, because that'll show you what you need to fix. And with pornography, I think there are basically like 5 layers to it. The first is a societal layer. There's a reason why all addictions are on the rise. There is a fundamental change in society, in the way that we connect with society, that makes us more addicted to stuff.
Yeah.
So if it was in the substance itself, like in pornography itself, then what we would see is there's a rise only in pornography addiction. But since there's a rise in everything, that means that something is fundamental is going on. We can get to that a little bit later. Next thing that we need to do about understanding about pornography addiction is understand physiology, neuroscience, and psychology. So if we look at pornography addiction, first thing is that it is a very powerful emotional coping mechanism. So the way that our brain is designed is like procreation kind of is the point, right? We can sort of say that like the reason that life exists, the purpose of life is to procreate.
Which means to have kids.
Yeah, right? So this is where if you kind of look at like the way that our body and our brain are designed, it's like if the opportunity for sexual relations and procreations is there, then we're going to push everything else to the side. So anytime we watch pornography or we get sexual stimulation, our amygdala, which is our emotional circuit of the brain, experiences negative emotions like fear and anxiety. It's also our survival center of the brain. And you turn on porn, that part of your brain just gets suppressed. And this is why a lot of people don't realize what a pornography addict looks like. A lot of people think it means like I'm watching porn and masturbating a lot, but most pornography addicts will watch it and not even necessarily masturbate. Or they'll watch it for hours throughout the day and aren't necessarily masturbating during that time. And that's because once you have that stimulation on the side, it's kind of like aromatherapy for your brain. It's kind of suppressing your amygdala. It's kind of calming you down because it has that neurologic effect. The reason that it has that neurologic effect is because sex is so important, right? So these circuits of the brain are very powerfully activated. The other thing that is really addictive about pornography is that it does cause a dopamine secretion. So orgasm feels really good. And so anytime we have an orgasm, we get a surge of dopamine, we get a surge of pleasure. It feels really, really good. And then the other problem that that creates, and this is the curse of humanity, is that anytime we get pleasure, we also buy ourselves craving and motivation. So when we secrete dopamine in the nucleus accumbens, it doesn't just do one thing. These 3 functions are fundamentally tied together in our neurocircuitry. So if I, drink this and I enjoy it, I will want it tomorrow. That's like, there's no way to escape that effect. So when I gain pleasure from pornography, I am buying myself craving. I am buying myself motivation towards it.
In the future.
In the future, 100%, right? So it's behavioral reinforcement. And then what happens is, so these are the 2 fundamental pieces at a neuroscience level. Then what happens is we kind of find ourselves like in a trap because since it is so good at these 2 things, nothing else is as effective. And we as human beings, if you look at like what we're designed to do on a physiologic level, it is to be efficient. So why do we love unhealthy food? Because we evolved in areas where if there's one bite that has 300 calories, like that bite will save you, right? That's what allows you to survive. So what we sort of got is like a calorie-dense neurological dopamine surge from pornography. And it's also like suppresses our emotions really, really, really deeply. And this is like literally true. So I don't know if you've ever, if you've been in love or like friends who are in love, but like when you're in love and you're like horny for something, right? There's like this idea of post-nut clarity and like pre-nut fog, I guess. So literally the way that our lust circuitry works is it suppresses all of these other parts of the brain. It suppresses the part of our brain that assesses risk.
For someone that doesn't know what that means, could you be a bit more sort of direct?
Yeah, so like when you fall in love, on the less vulgar side, so when you fall in love, like you start to do stupid things, right? Like you do stupid things when you're in love. And that's not a mistake, that's the way that it's wired. Because evolutionarily, there were basically two human beings, okay? One who would fall in love and did not do stupid things, and one who did fall in love and did do stupid things. Which one of those two do you think is more likely to procreate?
When you say stupid things, give me an example.
I'm gonna ignore my job. I've just gotten financially stable and I've fallen in love with someone who has a pile of credit card debt. This is a terrible idea to enter a relationship with them because I've just gotten all my shit sorted out and they don't have any of their shit sorted out. So there are all kinds of red flags that we ignore on purpose. Because if we didn't ignore those red flags, then we wouldn't end up procreating.
Got you.
Right?
You don't want to be rational in that moment because rationality would say,
And that's literally what happens. So we have circuits of the brain that will actually inhibit and shut off the rational parts of our brain. And this is where we get to post-nut clarity, which is this experience that many men have where after you finish the sexual act, you feel like very clear-headed, right? And so then what happens is now why is that? That's because the lustful parts of your brain were inhibiting, like literally inhibiting and shutting off the thinking parts of your brain. And once the lustful part shuts off, then we start thinking again.
Probably in my early 20s was the first time I experienced post-nut clarity. And I think it was 2, 3 a.m. in the morning. Here's me talking about my masturbation. It was like 2, 3 a.m. in the morning and there was this person that I was like vaguely interested in. I'm like super horny. I'm arranging to meet them at like 3 a.m. I think I'm like 21 years old. And I decide to masturbate instead. And immediately after I masturbated instead, it was like a completely different person inhabited my body. I was like, why? Within seconds, I was like, why the fuck were you going to get out of bed at 3 a.m. in the morning and drive for 55 minutes to meet someone you have really no interest in? And it was like that person could not recognize the person I was 10 minutes earlier. Mm-hmm. And I remember one day trying to explain this to a woman and she couldn't understand it. And I actually think she was quite offended by it. Because it's quite an offensive concept, I imagine, to a woman to hear that men experience a drop in interest, potentially, sometimes, after they masturbate.
Yeah, and I think the reason it's offensive to women is because in that moment, the dude is objectifying her, right? Like, it's like the woman becomes a sexual object. You're not a human anymore. And like, the reason they're offended is because that's exactly what happens. In that moment, there are such powerful drivers in our brain to drive us to procreate that like we don't view them as a complex human being with thoughts and feelings, right? We're just really, really horny. And that's literally what happens. Like in our brain, we stop viewing them as complex objects. And so the reason they get offended is sort of because they're right. And we start to view them that way. But that's also like biological. They're absolutely like societal and psychological things that we can get into in a minute, but that make things that worse. But I think it's like, it's understandable. Mm-hmm. And it's also like how we work.
Yeah, which is difficult to say.
Yeah.
But I just want to be honest about it because I think if we start from a place of like total honesty about these things, we can actually reason up to some real solutions. Yeah. If we're trying to be politically correct or whatever, we're never going to get to real answers here.
Absolutely. And all men, I hope, will experience post-nut clarity. And also, like, that doesn't make us bad men. It's a physiologic thing. And I think the key thing about whether you're good or bad is the way that you manage it, right? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what I'm talking about is like, you have to understand what is happening in your brain in order to then willfully take a step back and sort of like think about what am I feeling? And then eventually, once we understand where post-nut clarity comes from, we can cultivate it without having to nut.
Just this is, I know we're on a little bit of a tangent here, but do women experience the inverse of post-nut clarity? Because there's a lot of oxytocin released when we have sex. So I was just reading a study from 2021 in the Journal of Sex Research, and it found that women were more likely to feel emotionally connected, vulnerable, and have a desire for post-coital closeness, like cuddling or talking. However, men who are in long-term relationships reported feeling similarly bonded to women, which is probably explains actually why I'm also down to cuddle after, because she's been my partner for 7 years.
Yeah, so there is so much there. So now we're getting, I mean, if you want to go into that, that's the societal element, right? So there is the neuroscience of pornography addiction, what it does to your brain. But there is a fundamental societal issue which is driving men towards pornography and also addresses this kind of thing where relationships between men and women are getting harder. And as relationships between men and women are getting harder, there's a part of the brain, more often the male brain, that is getting starved for something because we no longer have sexual connections, emotional connections with women. And so when we get hungry for something, then the brain will try to find what it can to satisfy it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So there's a part of our brain that, that drives us towards procreation, but oftentimes in a real relationship, it comes with a lot of other things.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The problem is that when and this gets a bit technical, but when our brain wants something, it usually wants a whole package. So for example, like if you feel hungry, you don't want calories. I want to eat this, and I want to eat this, and I want to drink this, and I want to have some of this, right? So there are lots of different things that my brain wants or my body wants, and they're usually they all come together in a real healthy way, in a natural way, which is why it's healthy. Not that natural is healthy, but that's what we've adapted to. The problem with pornography is that it gives us a slice of what our brain craves. And the problem is once it gives you a slice, once you get that sexual gratification, your emotional connection is not met. You have no bond. You have no feeling of safety, nothing like that. Oftentimes you're filled with like regret and all kinds of guilt and things like that. And so even though you're satisfying that sort of procreative drive, all of the stuff that comes with it stays unsatisfied. And then the real problem is once we satisfy the procreative drive, the motivation to go and get all of those other things disappears. Right? So once I nut, post-nut clarity, I don't need a relationship with anyone else. Right? I'm not willing to sacrifice to deal with this person. So it's kind of like, it's sort of like if I fill up your stomach with just unhealthy food, like let's say I just give you straight calories, like some highly processed like hamburger wrapped in donuts or whatever, and drizzled with, take your pick of artery clogging stuff. After you eat that, you don't have any fiber, you don't have any micronutrients, but you're not going to crave broccoli.
Yeah.
Right? So that's what's happening in our society is we're using porn as a substitute for relationships. And that's creating these really strong societal pressures and being driven by. So what have you seen happening between men and women right now?
Women, I think, don't need men as
Okay.
much as they used to. And I think this is in part because of this whole sexual revolution and the pill and the feminism and all these things, which has tremendous upsides. I think that women and men are having less sex. They're getting married less. Men's attitude towards women has become a little bit more resentful in certain pockets of the internet. They perceive relationships with the other sex to be disposable more than ever before.
Men view women?
I would say both. And I think in
Okay.
part that's because of dating apps, just the perception of choice.
Okay.
The feeling that if you don't work out, there's another 1,000 people on my phone that I could give a shot to. I think the equation of a relationship, when we think about the investment it takes for it to work and what you get from it, people now perceive the equation not to be worth it.
Okay. I think there's a lot of great stuff there. So you're like a fully formed adult man, right?
I think so. I hope
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. Like you're like a man. You're not like a kid. You're not like a dude in early stages of development. You've got a career, you've got a relationship, you're buying a house, like you are an adult.
Yeah.
So if I was an 18-year-old
Yeah.
and I came to you, and let's say I'm your nephew or something like that, and I'm like, Stephen, fully formed adult, handsome man in relationship, I'm struggling to date.
Yeah.
What should I do?
You want me to give you advice? Yeah. Fuck. I think you should work on yourself.
Okay.
Especially as an 18-year-old man, because I think you need to, especially at that age, create some advantages. And so working on yourself could be learning, reading, going to the gym, building up the ability to provide for someone else and to protect somebody else. That's kind of really where I'd start. And again, that's biased because that's what I did at 18 years old.
Great.
I actually didn't date. I think I've been on 5 dates in my entire life.
Okay, so let's say I do that
Yeah.
and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm like, hey, I'm on this growth journey. And I'm sure you've encountered this, and there are going to be people in the audience who are like, the reason they're watching this podcast is because they're trying to do that. They're still not getting dates, right?
Yeah.
It's still hard to find a girlfriend. Then what do you have to say to them?
I would assume that the reason it's not working is because they're not in this frame of mind to find
Perfect.
love.
And when someone says, when a dude says,